Hey, in this video we will be using the NavMeshAgent in order to tell an object where to go. It's going to find its own way using what we set up in the last video, a NavMesh. So I'm in Unity and you can see that I have this blue NavMesh, which is the walkable area for my AI NavMeshAgent. And I want to set it up so that this red guy, this bad tank, is going to move around, to be able to plan where it's going to go and how it's going to get there. So I'll tell it where the destination is, and it's going to figure out the path. So first of all, my project was not set up quite perfectly to make this happen. So in my level manager, I've added a player object, and I have hooked that up so that my level manager knows which object is the player. So here I drag the tank in there, so it has a public reference to this player object. That's going to be used by the NavMeshAgent in order to tell where it needs to go. That's how I've decided to set it up. So for my bad tank, I'm going to need to add a component, a NavMeshAgent. These settings are fine, but you can modify them to change how this agent moves. And then I also want to create a new script, new C# script. I'll call this move to player. And so it's essentially going to be the bridge between having this NavMesh agent component and telling it where to go. So let me open that up. I want to have a reference to a NavMeshAgent. I'll call it agent. This type though isn't in any of these modules, so I'm going to have to add using unityengine.ai, and then we have a reference to that. And I can use getComponent as usual in order to get the NavMeshAgent component that's attached to this game object. But I want to enforce that this definitely exists. This script shouldn't be attached to anything that doesn't have a NavMeshAgent. So I can use an attribute in Unity, require component. And I can tell it that it needs to have a component of this special type, NavMeshAgent. And if it doesn't, then is going to create one for you automatically. It's going to assign one. And then with the rest of this, we can assume that it has that component. So what I'd like to do is just agent dot, and there's several different properties this thing has, but I just want destination. Destination is a vector 3 that we can set to tell it where to go. And now that I have my level manager with a reference to the player, I can do level manager.instance dot and then player. Player is a game object, so let me get the position from its transform. And there we go. Let's go back to Unity. Let me make sure that this bad tank is all set up. It needs to have that move to player component, right? Let's test it. Okay, so it is following the player going toward it. All right, there we go. And you can see in my level manager, I've got a reference to the player. There's a problem here though. If I ram into this guy, it kind of doesn't work right anymore. So this is kind of a conflict between a couple of components. This bad tank has a rigid body component, which tells it how to move after it's gotten bumped into, but it also has this NavMeshAgent, which tells it where to go according to its destination and the NavMesh that it's navigating. These two components are conflicting, and it's not able to do anything really well. So I'm going to have to adjust this a little bit and decide how it's going to resolve that conflict. So back in our script here, I'd like to check to see if it has a rigid body component. So let me make a rigid body reference, RB, and I'll use getComponent again in order to get that reference, rigid body. And then I can check to see if it has one of these rigid body components. If RB is not null, then it has a rigid body component. And then I can decide how I'm going to resolve this. I'm going to do this really simply, and I'm just going to say, well, let's keep the vertical velocity and say that's fine, but let's zero out the x and z velocity in order that the NavMeshAgent will do all of the motion in that plane. So rb.velocity, let's make a new vector3 and zero out the x. Let's preserve the y and then zero out the z. Okay. Alright, now this thing is an aggressive tank coming straight for me. Doesn't care. It'll keep chasing me wherever I go. Cool. So this may be what you want, or it may not be. I can imagine some ways that this could be a lot better. So one way is that I could imagine a certain distance between these objects, the player and this this NavMeshAgent, and if they're too close, then I might no longer tell it to go toward the player. I might have it just stop. I might also say I do want this velocity x and z sometimes, so I might have like a bump timer or something. So if there's a collision, then for like half a second or a full second, the NavMeshAgent is disabled and the velocity is not modified in this way. That way you could ram into someone really hard or fire a bullet at them and it knocks them back, and then they have some time to recover before they start moving at you again. So some options there. You should try one of those out, or try seeing what else you can do with this system. It's pretty cool. All right, have fun.